Good morning, my name is Gutierrez. I'm in 10th grade at Da Vinci Design High School, and today I will be presenting my character analysis for Guy Montag and Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, and my mastery of Essential Skill 4, Imperialism. Let's start with English. So my character analysis statement for Guy Montag is that he's a very intelligent and impulsive character who is constantly questioning his society as well as himself. The first piece of evidence takes place when he is watching his wife as she watches a show in the parlor, and he says, "That's all very well," cried Montag, "but what are they mad about? Who are these people? Who's that man and who's that woman? Are they husband and wife? Are they divorced, engaged, what? Good God, nothing's connected up." He's questioning if she even understands what she's watching because he feels that he's intelligent enough to understand, and then she doesn't really get why she's watching it or what she's watching, and nothing really makes sense to him, and that really makes him mad. And then the next quote is, Montag's hands picked up the Bible. He saw what his hands had done, and he looked surprised. "Would you like to own this?" Faber said, "I'd give my right arm." Montag stood there and waited for the next thing to happen. His hands, by themselves, like two men working together, began to rip the pages from the book. This happens later, towards the middle of the book, when he's talking with Faber, and Montag constantly describes his hands as being the sort of sentient being, and they do very rash things that he sort of makes it seem that he doesn't have control over them. So the decisions he makes doesn't really, or the decision that his hands make don't really coincide with like what he thinks. And he's also also shows his intelligence because he knows that if he does this, Faber will have to listen to him. And then the next part comes from when he's sort of watching his wife and the ladies who came to the parlor that night, and his wife says, Mildred beamed, you just ran away from the door, Guy, and don't make us nervous." But Montag was gone and back in a moment with a book in his hand. This again is another impulsive thing that he does. He gets really mad because they're not answering his questions correctly or how he wants them to, so he decides to sort of teach them a lesson. And then the next part is after he gets mad at Faber trying to stop him. "Leave me alone," Montag felt himself turning in a great circling roar and buzz and hum. "Montag, hold on, don't. Did you hear them? Did you hear these monsters talking about monsters? Oh God, the way they jabber about people and their own children and themselves, and the way they talk about their husbands, and the way they talk about war damage. I stand here and I can't believe it." Again, this shows his intelligence, because it infuriates him that they don't understand what they're talking about and they're speaking mindlessly kind of, and just talking, and he listens to them, and he can't believe that they're speaking without knowing what they're saying, because he knows more than them, or he believes he knows more than them. And then this is towards the end of the book. He twitched the safety catch on the flamethrower. Beatty glanced instantly at Montag's fingers, and his eyes widened the faintest bit. Montag saw the surprise there and glanced himself to his own hands to see what the new thing they had done. This is again another impulsive action. His murdering of his captain was more out of anger than self-defense, and it was another rash decision that he made. And later he kind of doesn't regret it, but he just sort of insults himself for making that decision because of the consequences he didn't realize. He put himself in danger now. Now I'll present for history. Or do you have any questions? Okay. So I'm doing Essential Skill 4, Imperialism, and my thesis statement is, imperialism was caused mainly by the industrialization of Europe and America, as well as their need for power. The effects are still seen today in the racial inequity throughout the world. So my first evidence is on how industrialization led to imperialism, and what I believe is that with the technological advancement that happened during the industrialization, that really made it possible for powerful nations to be able to go out and take over weaker nations, and it also motivated them to do so because it gave them need for other things from other places. And then a good example of this was how Britain was the first to industrialize, and so they became very powerful, and they had better a better army, better weaponry, they had more products to sell, and so it made it easier for them to go out and sort of sell these products and take over other smaller countries. And India was very important to them because they would go there, and India was very populated and had a lot of raw materials, and so with all this, they would go back to Britain, make products with these materials, and then use them, Indians, as laborers, and sell it back to them to create a profit. So that was a really good example of how they used all the forms of things that happen in industrialization to imperialize India completely. And then for how power and pride was a big part of imperialism, the Spanish-American War was pretty much America fighting with Spain because of their, they wanted to get revenge over the USS Maine, but then they also wanted to liberate Cuba. But what happened instead was they won the war and took all the countries Spain originally had control over, and sort of took control of them. They said originally they wanted to help them, but it seems that the underlying motive for them was to really completely take control of them to create a bigger empire. And the same thing happened with Hawaii a couple years previous to that, where they sort of created a base in Hawaii for sugar plantations. And instead, when the people of Hawaii and the Queen wanted back their own independence, America felt threatened and took complete control over them. And what happened with the Monroe Doctrine and Roosevelt Corollary was America basically stated that they were the boss of the entire Western Hemisphere and that the Europeans shouldn't mess with them. And then with the Roosevelt Corollary, Roosevelt stated that they have the ability to sort of decide what happens on that side with their military. They could invade, or they could go and make changes whenever they wanted to. And then the impacts of imperialism were that more powerful countries, such as those in Europe and America, became very entitled and felt they could still do whatever they wanted because of that entitlement. And to this day, you can still see that, and they still feel very powerful, and they still feel like they have that power. And then, for an example I chose to relate to today is what happened in America with the homicides of several black men. And the recent homicides that have taken place throughout the country have shown that there's been no indictment for the white cops who have killed them, and that shows entitlement that's still apparent today in this country. And blacks still struggle with and experience the effects of what started over 200 years ago, or 100 years ago, when imperialism, about 100 years ago when imperialism started. And it stems back to the age of imperialism, where Europeans felt they were better entitled to everything and everyone, and that's still seen today with these murders and them not being convicted. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
If you go into your DBT or geometry. I don't know if you remember what side. The whole button for the what? Your finger is just not the right side. It's a little button. There you go.
Okay.
Whichever one you want to start with.
What is a geometry?
Alright. All three through.
Okay. So, last month my dad's pancreas was removed. It produces insulin. I put a comma after last month because it was more of a space for breathing, because it just indicates when something happened. And my dad's pancreas was removed was the big actual sentence. And then it produces insulin. I put a semicolon because it produces insulin. It could stand on its own, but it makes more sense sort of connected to the actual sentence, and it gives more information. But it could stand on its own, sort of.
So because it can't stand on its own, what will it change the cost to?
Oh, independent clause.
Very good. Round number 250.
All right, why don't you talk me through a couple of your applications?
Okay. It says it was not motivated for capitalist profits, and then I put capitalist profits was basically the money that they were gonna get. But it says they all originated in political ambitions, but political ambitions would be them gaining political power when gaining all these countries they took control over. And then glory and national greatness was basically that the more power a country gained when taking over others, the more pride that the people of that country they felt for, because their country was more powerful, so they felt pride for their country, basically. And then 1954, it was that this happened late, like it didn't happen at the beginning, or what he said didn't happen at the beginning, this was later, towards the end of it.
Okay, go ahead, read me your thesis.
The author states that the main cause of imperialism was the nations wanting to gain political power and pride.
Okay, and your evidence?
According to Raymond Aron, all motivation for imperialism originated in political ambitions, the nation's will to power or glory or national greatness.
Okay, and your analysis?
Basically, nations were not greedy for money, but for power. The more power held by a nation, the more its people would support and glorify that country. This probably meant that there was a lot of competition between nations to see who was really the most powerful. This, and the pride felt by the people, was what motivated nations to imperialize.
Can you just read me again the last piece?
This probably meant that there was a lot of competition between nations to see who was really the most powerful. This, and the pride felt by the people, was what motivated nations to imperialize.
Okay, I don't really have any questions for you, Claire, just more so a comment when you say this probably. When you use the word probably, do you think that makes you sound sure of yourself? Okay, so what should you say instead?
I should just take out probably.
Okay, so write it with confidence. Then one thing I want you to work on is challenging yourself to find more academic ways of saying these words, like for example, a lot, and things like that. Okay? Alright.